$10 million. My husband's jaw dropped as he stared at the portfolio statement. Where did you get $10 million? I smiled at Richard, the man who had walked out on our 20-year marriage for his yoga instructor, the man who had told me I had wasted my potential and that I wasn't ambitious enough. Remember that silly hobby of mine you always dismissed? Turns out investing in tech startups wasn't just a waste of time after all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never planned on keeping secrets from Richard. When we first met in our mid-20s, I told him everything. My dreams, my fears, my passions. We were both young teachers at Westlake High School, me with English literature, and him with advanced mathematics. The faculty lounge became our meeting spot, where conversations about difficult students and administrative challenges gradually evolved into discussions about life, philosophy, and eventually our feelings for each other. Richard was charming in those early days. He had a way of commanding attention when he spoke, his deep voice carrying across a room with natural authority. The students respected him, and so did the other teachers. When he started bringing me coffee each morning, black, with just a hint of cinnamon, exactly how I liked it, I felt the flutter of something promising. "Vivian," he'd say, handing me the steaming cup, "you look like you could use this." His smile would reach his eyes then, crinkling the corners in a way that made my heart skip. That was 23 years ago, before everything changed, before I discovered that the man I married wasn't the man he would become. Our courtship was straight out of a romance novel. Weekend picnics at Crescent Lake, spontaneous road trips to coastal towns where we'd walk barefoot on empty beaches, late-night conversations about building a life together. 3 months after our first official date, Richard proposed on the rooftop garden of the city's oldest library, my favorite place in the world. He'd arranged for the librarian to accidentally lead me there while I was searching for an obscure poetry collection. "Vivian Monroe," he said, down on one knee between rows of potted herbs and flowering plants. "I want to build a lifetime of stories with you. Will you marry me?" In that moment, surrounded by books below and stars above, I believed in forever. I believed in us. The wedding was modest, but beautiful. My parents had passed away years before, so my uncle walked me down the aisle. Richard's family came in full force. His parents, his 2 sisters with their husbands, cousins from across the country. They were loud, opinionated, and tight-knit in a way my small family never was. His mother, Gretchen, hugged me with surprising strength for a woman of her stature, whispering, "Welcome to the family, dear. We take care of our own." I didn't realize then how prophetic those words would be, or how taking care of our own would eventually exclude me when I needed that family the most. The first 5 years of marriage were blissful. We bought a small starter home in a neighborhood with good schools, thinking ahead to the family we planned to have. We painted walls together, planted a garden, hosted dinner parties for colleagues who became friends. Richard was promoted to head of the mathematics department, and I published my first collection of poetry through a small local press. We were building something beautiful, something that felt unbreakable. Then came the challenges. 3 miscarriages in 2 years left. Me emotionally drained and physically exhausted. The doctors couldn't find anything specifically wrong, just the cruel statistics of nature working against us. After the 3rd loss, something shifted in Richard. His ambitious nature, once directed toward building our life together, began to focus solely on his career. "We need to think about our future," he said one evening, scrolling through job listings on his laptop. "Teaching isn't going to provide the lifestyle we deserve. I'm thinking about moving into educational administration, maybe even the private sector eventually." I supported him, of course. Through his master's degree in educational leadership, through his nights studying and weekends networking, I picked up extra classes to help with finances, started a creative writing workshop at the local community center for additional income. When he was offered the position of vice principal at Lakeside Preparatory Academy, a prestigious private school across town, I celebrated with him, even though it meant leaving the school where we'd met, where we'd built our first shared world. It was around this time, 10 years into our marriage, that I received an unexpected inheritance from my mother's cousin, a woman I'd only met a handful of times. She'd been some kind of investment banker in New York, childless and apparently fond enough of me to leave me $50,000. Richard wanted to put it toward a down payment on a larger house in a more upscale neighborhood. "This is our chance to move up, Vivian," he insisted, showing me listings for homes with pristine lawns and soaring ceilings. "My new position at Lakeside changes everything. We need to look the part." But something inside me resisted. Maybe it was the lingering grief from our losses. Maybe it was intuition. But I felt a sudden fierce protectiveness over this windfall. "Let me think about it," I told him. "This is the only inheritance I'll ever receive. I want to be sure." His frustration was immediate. "What is there to think about? This is a no-brainer. We've been talking about moving for years. Just give me some time," I pleaded. "A few weeks to research our options." Reluctantly, he agreed, though his disappointment was palpable. During those weeks, I did research, but not the kind Richard expected. I'd always had an interest in emerging technologies, reading tech blogs and following innovation trends as a hobby. One of my former students, Jenny Lynn, had gone on to work for a venture capital firm specializing in early-stage tech investments. On a whim, I reached out to her. "Mrs. Monroe," she exclaimed when we met for coffee. She was no longer the shy sophomore who'd written brilliant essays about dystopian fiction, but a confident young woman in a tailored blazer. "I can't believe you want to know about investing. You were always so focused on literature." "People contain multitudes," I smiled. "And please, call me Vivian now." Over the next 2 hours, Jenny explained the basics of angel investing and venture capital. She talked about risk profiles, diversification, and the importance of understanding the technologies you invest in. As she spoke, something awakened in me, a sense of possibility, of autonomy I hadn't felt in years. "Would you help me?" I asked finally. "If I wanted to invest a small amount, say $10,000, in something, promising, would you guide me?" Jenny beamed. "I'd be honored, but let me be clear, this is high risk. You could lose everything." "I understand," I said, and I did. Perhaps for the first time in my marriage, I was making a significant financial decision that wasn't about us, but about me. It felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When I told Richard I wanted to invest $10,000 of my inheritance in tech startups, his reaction was predictably dismissive. "That's throwing money away," he scoffed. "You don't know anything about technology or investing. Leave that to the professionals." His condescension stung, but I held firm. "I've been researching," I explained, "and I have a former student who works in venture capital who's willing to advise me." "One of your students?" His laugh was sharp. "Vivian, be serious. What could one of your students possibly know about proper investing?" I didn't argue further. Instead, I compromised. $40,000 went toward our new house in Oakwood Heights, a neighborhood filled with doctors, lawyers, and business executives. The remaining $10,000 became my secret project, a separate account Richard soon forgot about as he immersed himself in his new role and our new social circle. Working with Jenny, I made my first investment in a small startup developing accessibility software for visually impaired users. The company was founded by a young programmer whose sister was losing her sight to a degenerative condition. Their passion and purpose resonated with me. 6 months later, the company was acquired by a tech giant for their innovative approach, and my $10,000 turned into $30,000. I was hooked. Not on the money itself, but on the process, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Researching companies, understanding their missions, evaluating their potential to create meaningful change. I reinvested everything, diversifying across several startups. Some failed completely. Others provided modest returns. A few exceeded all expectations. As my small portfolio grew, so did the distance between Richard and me. His ambition had carried him from vice principal to principal of Lakeside Prep in just 3 years. Our home became a stage for dinner parties with board members and potential donors. I played my part, the supportive wife, the charming hostess, while maintaining my teaching position at the public high school, a choice Richard increasingly criticized. "It doesn't make sense," he'd say as we prepared for yet another networking event. "My wife still teaching at a public school when I run one of the most prestigious private academies in the state. People find it eccentric." "I love my students," I'd respond. "Not everyone has access to schools like Lakeside. Those kids need good teachers too." He'd sigh, straightening his designer tie. "Your loyalty is admirable, but misplaced. You could be the head of our English department by now." I never told him that Lakeside had indeed offered me that position, or that I'd declined without a second thought, just as I never told him that my initial investment had grown to over 6 figures, then 7. It wasn't a deliberate deception. At first, more an omission that grew easier to maintain with each dismissive comment about my lack of ambition or wasted potential. 15 years into our marriage, Richard was appointed superintendent of the entire Lakeside Academy system. 3 campuses across the state, thousands of students, and a salary that tripled our already comfortable income. The ambitious teacher I'd fallen in love with had become an educational executive who spoke in terms of endowments and capital campaigns. He bought a sports car, then a vacation property in Aspen without consulting me. "For networking," he explained when I questioned, "the expense." "The right connections are everything in this world, Vivian. When will you understand that?" I understood more than he realized. I understood that the wealth gap between us had become his favorite metric of our worth as individuals. I understood that the warm, passionate man who had proposed on a rooftop garden now saw me as a liability to his social climbing. And I understood with growing clarity that I was staying in a marriage that existed mostly in my memory. Still, 20 years is a long time. We had built a life, intertwined our stories, in ways that seemed impossible to untangle. I told myself that all marriages evolve, that passion gives way to partnership, that Richard's increasing criticism of my career choices, my appearance, my hobbies, was just his way of pushing me toward what he thought was a better life. I made excuses for the late nights, the weekend work emergencies, the growing emotional distance. Even when our 20-year anniversary passed with nothing more than a hastily purchased gift card and a distracted dinner at a restaurant where Richard spent most of the evening talking to a colleague at another table, I told myself we were just going through a phase. The truth arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, innocuous and world-shattering all at once. I'd come home early from school, a rare migraine forcing me to cancel my last 2 classes. The house was supposed to be empty. Richard. At work, our housekeeper Teresa not scheduled until Thursday. But there was an unfamiliar car in our driveway, sleek and expensive. Confusion, then concern propelled me through the front door. Perhaps Richard was ill too? Then I heard them, voices from upstairs, laughter, sounds that stopped me cold in the foyer of my own home. I should have shouted. I should have stormed upstairs and confronted them immediately. Instead, I found myself moving silently through the house, up the stairs, toward our bedroom door, which stood slightly ajar. What I saw confirmed my worst suspicions. Richard, my husband of 20 years, tangled in our sheets with Serena Davis, the 30-something yoga instructor who had recently joined the wellness program at Lakeside Academy. Her blonde hair spilled. Across my pillowcase, Her toned body arched beneath my husband's familiar form. I didn't make a scene. Something inside me had gone very still, very quiet. I withdrew as silently as I had approached, collected my purse from the hall table, and left the house, closing the front door with deliberate gentleness behind me. In my car, parked now on a quiet street 3 blocks from home, I called Jenny. "Lynn, I need a place to stay for a while," I said when she answered, my voice strangely calm. "And I need your help with some financial arrangements." Jenny, now a partner at her firm, didn't ask questions. "My guest room is yours for as long as you need it. I'll text you the address and door code. And Vivian, whatever you need, I'm here." I spent that night in Jenny's modern downtown apartment, staring out at the city lights from her 23rd floor window. My investment portfolio, which Jenny had helped me manage with increasing sophistication over the years, had grown to just over $10 million. $10 million that Richard knew nothing about. $10 million that represented not just money, but a decade of learning, growing, and believing in myself when my husband no longer did. For the first time since walking out of my own home, I allowed myself to cry. Not for the marriage I was losing, but for the years I had spent diminishing myself to accommodate Richard's ego. When morning came, I was ready. Ready to end my marriage, ready to reclaim my life, and ready to shock the man who thought he knew everything about the woman he was betraying. Richard's text came while I was drinking coffee in Jenny's kitchen. "Where are you? We need to talk." My response was simple. "Yes, we do. Meet me at Westlake Cafe at noon." Westlake Cafe held memories for us. First dates, Sunday brunches, celebrations of small victories early in our careers. Now its familiar warmth felt like a strategic choice rather than nostalgia. Public enough to prevent a scene. Intimate enough for truth. I arrived 20 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a view of the entrance. The manager, Paolo, recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Monroe? Haven't seen you in ages. The usual Earl Grey?" His genuine smile was a welcome contrast to what awaited me. "Thank you, Paolo, and perhaps a glass of water as well." My hands were steady as I arranged the manila folder I'd brought. Printouts of account statements, investment summaries, and divorce papers Jenny had helped me secure through her attorney that morning. Richard arrived exactly at noon. Punctuality. Being one virtue he'd never abandoned. He wore the gray suit I'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago, his silver-streaked hair perfectly coiffed, his expression a practiced blend of concern and authority. The confidence in his stride faltered slightly when he spotted me, composed and waiting rather than tear-stained and desperate as he'd likely expected. "Vivian," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "You disappeared." I was worried. No mention of Serena, no acknowledgement of what I'd witnessed. His opening move was classic Richard, establish a narrative where he was the reasonable party, I the irrational one. I took a deliberate sip of my tea before responding. "Were you worried when you brought Serena into our bed yesterday afternoon? Or perhaps you were too preoccupied?" The color drained from his face, then returned in a rush. "You were home. Why didn't you say anything?" What exactly should I have said, Richard? "Excuse me, could you please stop having sex with your yoga instructor in our marital bed? I have a migraine." My voice remained level, though the bitterness seeped through. He had the decency to look momentarily ashamed before his expression hardened into defensiveness. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out. What happened with Serena? It wasn't planned. Things between us have been difficult for years, Vivian. You must have felt it too." "Difficult," I repeated, testing the word. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe watching your husband become increasingly embarrassed by your existence." "That's not fair," he protested, leaning forward. "I've always supported your teaching, while making it abundantly clear you found my career choices disappointing." I finished for him, while suggesting repeatedly that I wasn't living up to my potential, that I was holding myself back. holding you back." He sat back, jaw tight. "I pushed you because I saw what you could be, what we could be together. But you were always comfortable, with less, always settling." The irony of his statement might have made me laugh if it weren't so painful. 20 years of marriage, and he had no idea who I really was or what I'd accomplished. The realization was both liberating and devastating. "I think we should get divorced," I said simply, pushing the legal documents toward him. "I've had papers drawn up. Standard division of assets, no alimony requests." His expression shifted from surprise to calculation. I could almost see him, tallying figures in his head. The house in Oakwood Heights, the Aspen property, his retirement accounts, his current salary versus mine. The math of our dissolution. "If that's what you want," he said slowly, not touching the documents. "But we should discuss this with proper legal representation. These decisions shouldn't be made in the heat of emotion." "I've had 20 years of emotion, Richard. The last 12 hours have been remarkably clear by comparison." I opened the folder, retrieving only the divorce papers. "My attorney can meet?" "With yours whenever convenient. I'm staying with a friend for now. I'll collect my personal belongings when you're at work next week." He frowned, confused by my composure. "Your attorney? Since when do you have an attorney?" "Since this morning. Jenny Lynn referred me to her law firm." "Jenny Lynn, your former student?" His dismissive tone hadn't changed in 10 years. "Vivian, this is serious. You need proper representation, not some child playing lawyer." I couldn't help the small smile that formed. "Jenny is a partner at Meridian Venture Capital now. Her firm's legal team handles complex financial situations regularly." "Venture capital?" His brow furrowed. "What complex financial situation?" "Our assets are straightforward." For a moment, I considered revealing everything right then. The portfolio, the decade of successful investments, the financial independence I'd built while he was busy criticizing my lack of ambition. But something held me back. Not fear, not uncertainty, but a sense that this revelation deserved better timing. That I deserved better than to unveil my greatest achievement as a desperate attempt to impress a man who'd betrayed me. "Let's just say I've been more productive with my time than you've given me credit for," I replied instead. "Sign the papers, Richard. Or don't. Either way, this marriage is over." His fingers drummed against the table, a habit from his teaching days when students tested his patience. "Where will you go? What will you do? Teaching salary barely covers rent in this city, especially with your modest savings." The condescension was automatic, ingrained. Even now, facing the end of our marriage, he couldn't help but remind me of my presumed financial inadequacy. "I'll manage," I said, standing and gathering my things. I left enough cash to cover both our drinks, a final small act of independence. I always have. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of practical matters. I moved from Jenny's guest room to a furnished short-term rental downtown, a sleek one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city park. At her insistence, I took a leave of absence from teaching, giving myself space to process the seismic shift in my life. "You don't need the paycheck," Jenny pointed out as we reviewed my portfolio one evening. "And frankly, you've earned a break. 20 years with that man? I don't know how you did it." I thought about her question later, alone in my temporary home. How had I done it? How had I remained in a marriage that had slowly drained my sense of self-worth? The answer wasn't simple. There had been love once, genuine and bright. There had been comfort in the familiar, even as familiarity bred contempt. And there had been fear, not of Richard himself, but of starting over, of admitting failure, of facing a world I hadn't navigated alone since my 20s. My phone chimed with a text from Richard. "Lawyer says you're refusing standard financial disclosure. What are you hiding?" I set the phone aside without responding. My attorney had advised limited contact, especially regarding financial matters. Let him make assumptions, she'd suggested with a knowing smile. Men like your husband hang themselves with their own arrogance. Richard's assumptions became clear at our first mediation session. He arrived with Bradley Wilson, a divorce attorney, known for aggressive tactics in securing favorable settlements for high-earning spouses. I brought Diane Mercer, Jenny's recommendation, whose calm demeanor and impeccable credentials seemed to irritate Richard from the moment introductions were made. My client is prepared to be generous, Bradley began, sliding a proposal across the table. Full ownership of the Oakwood Heights property, a lump sum of $500,000, and continued health insurance coverage for 3 years. He smiled thinly. Given the length of the marriage and Mrs. Monroe's limited earning capacity, we believe this represents a more than equitable division. Diane glanced at the documents without touching them. And in exchange, Mr. Monroe would retain the Aspen property, his retirement accounts, and of course, his post-marital income and assets. Bradley's tone suggested this was obvious, reasonable, the natural order of things. I see, Diane said, opening her own folder. Before we proceed, I should mention that my client has concerns about undisclosed assets. Richard stiffened beside his attorney. What undisclosed assets? I've provided full financial statements. Yes, you have, Diane agreed pleasantly. But we have reason to believe there may be accounts or investments not included in your disclosure. Perhaps related to your relationship with Ms. Davis? The accusation was strategic, designed to put Richard on defensive footing, his face flushed with anger. That's absurd. I've hidden nothing. Vivian is the one being evasive about her financial situation. My client has nothing to hide, Diane countered smoothly. But given the circumstances of this divorce, we're exercising appropriate caution. The meeting devolved into tense negotiations about discovery timelines and documentation requirements. Throughout it all, I remained silent, watching Richard's growing frustration as his attempts to control the process were methodically countered. By the end, he was visibly seething, his earlier confidence replaced by suspicious glances in my direction. As we gathered our things to leave, he finally addressed me directly. What game are you playing, Vivian? We both know you don't have any money of your own. I met his gaze steadily. Then you have nothing to worry about, do you? Outside, the law office's spring rain had given way to weak sunshine. Diane touched my arm lightly. He's going to push hard on financial disclosure. Are you prepared for that? I nodded. More than he is. The truth was, I had been preparing for over a decade, though I hadn't known it then. Each investment, each careful decision made independently, each victory celebrated quietly, all had been laying groundwork for this moment of reckoning. Not just financial independence, but the complete reclamation of my identity apart from Richard. News of our separation spread quickly through Richard's professional circles. I received a surprising number of messages from faculty wives I'd thought were merely social acquaintances. Some offered generic sympathy, others shared their own marital disappointments. A few even confessed they'd suspected Richard's infidelity long before I discovered it. The community I'd thought would shun me instead embraced me, revealing the fragility of the facade Richard had constructed. The most unexpected call came from Margaret Whitmore, chair of the Lakeside Academy Board of Trustees and one of Richard's most ardent supporters. Vivian, dear, her cultured voice carried through the phone with characteristic authority. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I felt I should reach out personally. This situation is most unfortunate. I braced myself for polite condemnation, for the subtle suggestion that I should have tried harder to keep my husband satisfied. Instead, what followed surprised me. Richard's behavior is unacceptable. The board has serious concerns about his judgment, bringing such scandal to our institution. She paused, her disapproval evident even through the phone. We've placed him on administrative leave pending review. I didn't know. I managed, genuinely surprised. Richard's position had seemed untouchable, his professional reputation impervious to personal misconduct. Yes, well, Margaret continued, ethical leadership begins at home, as I've always maintained. But that's not why I'm calling. I understand you're an extraordinary English teacher. Lakeside Academy's English department could benefit from your expertise should you find yourself seeking new opportunities after everything settles. The irony wasn't lost on me. The position Richard had pressured me to take for years was now being offered directly, not because of my connection to him, but despite it. And in this moment of professional affirmation from an unexpected source, I realized how thoroughly I had internalized Richard's dismissive assessment of my career. That's very kind, Margaret. I'll certainly consider it once things are finalized. The words felt diplomatic rather than committal, leaving space for possibilities I hadn't yet imagined. After we hung up, I sat looking out at the park below my window, watching joggers circle the lake, children climbing the elaborate playground structure, couples strolling hand in hand beneath flowering trees. For 20 years, my identity had been inextricably linked to Richard's, his wife, his support system, his occasional embarrassment. Now, with each passing day, I was reclaiming pieces of myself, rediscovering Vivian Monroe separate from Richard's expectations and disappointments. That evening, as I was reviewing investment proposals Jenny had forwarded, my phone lit up with Richard's name. Against my better judgment, I answered. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "The board has put me on leave. Did you know about this?" "Margaret called me," I admitted. "I'm sorry about your position." "Sorry?" His laugh was bitter. "This is your doing. Your dramatic exit, your mysterious attorney, your refusal to just handle this divorce reasonably, it's all created a spectacle that's threatening my career." The familiar pattern of blame struck me anew. In Richard's world, consequences were never the natural result of his own actions, but always someone else's fault, particularly mine. "You brought your yoga instructor into our marital bed," I reminded him, keeping my voice level. "If there's a spectacle, you created it." "Serena and I are in love," he shot back defensively. "It's not some tawdry affair. We're building a life together." The declaration should have hurt. Perhaps weeks ago it would have. Instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity, as if viewing our entire marriage through a newly focused lens. "I hope you'll be very happy together," I said, and meant it. "But my attorney will continue handling our divorce proceedings. I have nothing more to say on the matter." "Wait," he said quickly, his tone shifting from accusatory to conciliatory. "That's not why I called. We've known each other for over 20 years, Vivian. We built a life together. Whatever's happened, we should be able to talk directly, not through lawyers." I hesitated, suspicious of this sudden change. "What do you want to talk about, Richard?" "Dinner," he proposed. "Just dinner and conversation. The Laurel Room tomorrow at 7, for old time's sake." The Laurel Room was one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, a place Richard had taken me only for significant anniversaries or to impress particularly important colleagues. His choice wasn't accidental. "Why the Laurel Room?" I asked. "Because we deserve a civilized conversation in a beautiful setting," he replied smoothly. "No lawyers, no accusations. Just us, remembering what we once meant to each other before we make final decisions. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps a lingering attachment to the man I'd once loved, or perhaps simply the desire for closure on my own terms. But I heard myself agreeing. "Fine. Tomorrow at 7. As I hung up, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Richard's sudden interest in reconciliation coincided too neatly with his professional troubles to seem genuine. Yet something compelled me to meet him, to face whatever manipulation he planned with the newfound strength I'd discovered in his absence. I called Jenny, explaining the situation. Her response was immediate and emphatic. "He's panicking," she declared. The board's action has him scared. He's realized he might lose everything: job, reputation, financial security, and suddenly you look like his best option again. Her voice softened. Be careful, Vivian. Men like Richard don't change overnight. I know, I assured her, but I need to do this for myself. The next evening, I dressed with deliberate care, not to impress Richard, but to armor myself in confidence. The woman who entered the Laurel Room at precisely 7 o'clock bore little resemblance to the accommodating wife who had dimmed her light to avoid outshining her husband. My midnight blue dress was elegantly simple. My grandmother's pearl earrings caught the light, and my posture conveyed a certainty I was still learning to feel. Richard was already seated at a prime table overlooking the city lights. He stood, as I approached, his appreciative glance taking in my appearance with obvious surprise. Vivian, you look different, beautiful. Thank you, I replied, accepting the compliment without elaboration as the server held my chair. After ordering drinks, a dry martini for him, sparkling water for me, Richard leaned forward with practiced sincerity. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks. About us, about what went wrong. And what conclusions have you reached? I kept my tone neutral, curious rather than invested. I made mistakes, he admitted, the confession clearly rehearsed. I took you for granted. I got caught up in ambition and status and lost sight of what really matters. He reached across the table for my hand, which I subtly moved to adjust my napkin. We had something special once. I think we could find our way back to that. And Serena? I asked. Your great love, the woman you're building a life with? His expression flickered with irritation before settling back into earnest contrition. A mistake. I was flattered by her attention, confused about my own feelings. It wasn't love. I see. I took a sip of water, watching him over the rim of my glass. And this realization coincidentally occurred right after the board placed you on administrative leave? That's unfair, he protested, though his eyes slid away from mine. My professional situation has nothing to do with my feelings for you. Richard, I said gently, for 20 years, I believed every word you said, every criticism, every promise, every declaration of love and disappointment. I'm not that woman anymore. His facade cracked slightly, frustration seeping through. Then who are you now, Vivian? This mysterious woman with secret attorneys and financial smokescreens. This isn't you. That's where you're wrong, I replied, feeling a strange calm descend. This is exactly who I am, who I've always been, beneath the accommodations and compromises I made to preserve your ego. The waiter arrived with our drinks, momentarily interrupting the tension. Richard downed half his martini in one swallow before continuing. Let's be practical, he said, his tone sharpening. You're 52 years old. You've been a high school English teacher your entire career. Your retirement savings are minimal. The settlement I've offered is more than generous. The house, financial security, health insurance. What exactly do you think awaits you out there alone? The condescension in his voice was so familiar, so expected, that it nearly made me smile. This was the real Richard emerging, the man who had spent years ensuring I understood my place in his world, my limitations, my dependence on his generosity. And in that moment, I knew exactly why I had come tonight. Not for closure, not for reconciliation, but for this precise conversation, this opportunity to finally reveal the truth on my own terms. Actually, I said, opening my handbag and retrieving a single folded document, I've been meaning to show you something. I slid the document across the table, a single page containing the summary of my investment portfolio. The elegant Laurel. Room lighting caught the embossed logo of Meridian Venture Capital at the top of the page. Richard glanced at it casually, then did a double-take as the numbers registered. His eyes widened, scanning the figures once, twice, his hand reaching for his martini without taking his gaze from the paper. "What is this?" His voice had lost its patronizing edge, replaced by genuine confusion. "My current financial statement," I replied simply. "As of yesterday afternoon." He looked up at me, then back at the document, his expression cycling rapidly through disbelief, suspicion, and stunned realization. $10 million? The words came out as a strangled whisper. "This is some kind of joke." "No joke. Just a decade of careful investing, starting with that inheritance you wanted to use for a down payment on the house in Oakwood Heights." I took a calm sip of my water, watching him process this new reality. "Remember how dismissive you were when I said I wanted to invest some of it? Leave that to the professionals, I believe were your exact words." The color drained from his face as comprehension dawned. "You've had this money all this time? While I've been working myself to death to provide us with a good life?" There it was, the immediate reframing to place himself at the center of the narrative, to cast himself as the wronged party. It was so predictable I almost felt pity. "I've been growing this money all this time," I corrected gently. "Through research, risk assessment, and making connections with innovators who saw possibilities where others didn't. And as for that good life you provided, your salary funded the lifestyle you wanted, Richard. The one that served your ambitions, your social climbing, your image." He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In many ways, he was. The woman he'd married, the woman he thought he knew, had never existed outside his narrow perception. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Anger, betrayal, or perhaps simple greed. I considered the question carefully, owing him at least that much honesty after 20 years. "At first, it was because you made it clear you thought I was incapable of making sound financial decisions. After my first few investments succeeded, I realized I enjoyed having something that was solely mine, not subject to your judgment or criticism." I paused, meeting his gaze directly. "And then, as the gulf between us widened over the years, it became obvious that knowing about my success would only have threatened you." Richard's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening around his glass. "Threatened? Me? That's absurd. I would have been proud of you." The lie hung between us, too transparent to dignify with a response. We both knew the truth. Richard's pride had always been contingent on maintaining the upper hand, intellectually, financially, socially. My success, hidden or not, upended the power dynamic he'd cultivated throughout our marriage. "All these years," he continued, his voice hardening, "you've been secretive, deceptive." "No," I cut him off firmly. "I've been private about one aspect of my life. You've been deceptive, bringing another woman into our bed, into our home, while making me believe our marriage still meant something to you." The waiter approached with menus, sensing the tension and retreating quickly after we waved him away. Around us, the Laurel Room continued its elegant evening service. Other diners engaged in their own conversations, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring at our table. Richard drained his martini and signaled for another, his composure cracking. "You know what this means for the divorce," he stated rather than asked, the attorney's son in him calculating even now. "It means I don't need your generous settlement offer," I replied. "It means I don't need the house you thought was buying. My silence or compliance, it means I'm negotiating from a position of choice, not necessity." His second martini arrived, and he took a long swallow before leaning forward, voice lowered. "Be reasonable, Vivian. 20 years of marriage means something. We've built a life together, shared everything. Under the law, marital assets are divided equally." "My portfolio isn't a marital asset," I interrupted calmly. "My attorney has documented every investment, tracing each back to my inheritance, which was explicitly designated as separate property in that prenuptial agreement. Your father insisted we sign." I allowed myself a small smile. The agreement that was supposed to protect your future earnings from my potential claims, not the other way around. The irony wasn't lost on him. Richard's father, a corporate attorney with old-fashioned views on marriage and money, had presented the prenuptial agreement as a prudent safeguard for his promising son. The document had focused almost exclusively on protecting Richard's potential future earnings and family inheritances, paying little attention to my modest teacher's salary or hypothetical assets. Neither father nor son had imagined a scenario where I might accumulate wealth independently. That's not what the prenup was designed to cover, he sputtered, legal mind struggling to reframe the situation. According to Diane, that's exactly what it covers, I replied. Inherited assets maintained separately throughout the marriage. Your father's attorney was quite thorough, just not in the direction he anticipated needing protection. For a moment, Richard looked genuinely lost, the careful scaffolding of his life visibly crumbling. Then, with the adaptability that had served his ambition for decades, he shifted tactics. "Vivian," he began, voice softening, reaching again for my hand across the table. This time, I allowed the contact, curious to see what approach he would try. "This changes everything, don't you see? We've been under so much pressure. My career, our finances. It created a strain that led me to terrible mistakes." His thumb stroked my knuckles in a gesture once familiar. "With your investments and my connections, we could start fresh. Travel, maybe. You could leave teaching, write that novel you've always talked about." The offer was delivered with practiced sincerity, his eyes holding mine with the intensity that had once made my heart race. For the briefest moment, I glimpsed the Richard I had fallen in love with all those years ago. Charming, visionary, able to paint pictures of potential futures so vividly they seemed already realized. But beneath his words, beneath the renewed interest and sudden respect, was the unmistakable calculation of a man who had just discovered that the wife he'd discarded was worth far more than he'd realized, financially and otherwise. I gently withdrew my hand. "The novel will have to wait a bit longer. I've accepted a position as education director at the Morgan Foundation, overseeing their literacy initiatives across 5 states. His surprise was genuine. "The Morgan Foundation? Since when?" "Since yesterday. Melissa Morgan and I serve on the library board together. She's been trying to recruit me for years. I hadn't planned to share this news tonight, but Richard's transparent attempt at reconciliation had forced my hand. "I start next month." "You're leaving teaching after defending your precious classroom all these years?" The accusation in his tone was reflexive, a default setting of disappointment he couldn't seem to disable. "I'm expanding my impact," I corrected. "From one classroom to programs serving thousands of students." I stood, placing my napkin beside, my untouched water glass. "I won't be staying for dinner after all. I've said what I came to say." Richard rose quickly, panic flashing across his features. "Wait, you can't just drop this on me and leave. We need to discuss what this means for us, for the divorce." "There's nothing to discuss," I replied, gathering my purse. "Our attorneys will handle the details. The prenup is clear. Your settlement offer is declined. I'll be making arrangements to collect my personal belongings from the house next week." "The house," he repeated, a new calculation visibly forming. "You don't want the house anymore?" "No, Richard. I don't want anything from our marriage except the ending." As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me one final time, stripped of pretense, raw with a vulnerability I'd rarely witnessed in 20 years together. "Did you ever love me at all?" I looked back at him, this man who had been the center of my world for so long, now suddenly diminished in the soft lighting of the Laurel Room. "Yes," I answered honestly. "Completely, at the beginning. Less and less as you showed me who you really were. And now, not at all." The night air felt cleansing. As I stepped outside, the city stretching before me in a tapestry of lights and possibilities. For the first time since discovering Richard's betrayal, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for the pain or the deception, but for the liberation that had followed. The woman walking away from the Laurel Room was not the same one who had entered it. Or perhaps she was exactly the same, finally visible to herself. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. How did it go? Need rescue? I smiled, typing back. Mission accomplished. Celebrating at Riverside Park. Join me? 15 minutes later, we sat on a bench overlooking the river, the city's reflection wavering in the dark water. I recounted the evening, Jenny's expressions shifting from concern to satisfaction as I described Richard's reaction to my portfolio and job announcement. I wish I could have seen his face, she said, handing me a paper cup of hot chocolate she'd picked up en route. The great Richard Monroe, realizing his discarded wife was a financial powerhouse all along. Classic. It wasn't about humiliating him, I mused, warming my hands on the cup. Though I can't deny a certain satisfaction, it was about finally being seen, not as his wife, not as an extension of his ambitions, but as myself. Jenny nudged my shoulder gently. For what it's worth, some of us always saw you, Mrs. Monroe. You were the only teacher who ever treated us like our ideas mattered, like we had potential beyond test scores and college applications. The simple truth of her words touched me more deeply than Richard's practiced flattery ever had. Thank you for that, and for everything else. The investment guidance, the legal referrals, the guest room when I needed it most. Full circle? She grinned. You invested in me when I was just a quiet sophomore with weird ideas about dystopian fiction. Now I get to help you invest in whatever comes next. The following weeks unfolded with surprising ease. The divorce proceedings, which Richard had clearly expected to drag out through contentious negotiations, were settled quickly once his attorney realized the prenuptial agreement did indeed protect my separate property. The house in Oakwood Heights and the Aspen property remained with Richard, along with his retirement accounts and personal effects. I claimed only what I had brought into the marriage: family heirlooms, books, artwork I'd collected over the years, plus my separate financial assets. Richard made one final attempt at reconciliation, arriving at my downtown rental unannounced one evening with an elaborate bouquet and a jewelry box containing a diamond pendant I recognized from the window of the city's most exclusive jeweler. A new beginning, he offered, standing awkwardly in my doorway. No secrets, no past mistakes, just us, building something honest this time. I accepted the flowers, but returned the jewelry box unopened. There is no us anymore, Richard. I've signed the divorce papers. So have you. Papers can be withdrawn, he insisted. Divorces get called off all the time when couples realize what they're throwing away. Looking at him, still handsome, still commanding, still unable to accept that. His narrative wasn't the only one that mattered. I felt the last wisps of emotional attachment dissolve. What happened with Serena? I asked, placing the flowers on the entry table. He flinched at her name. That's over. It was a mistake, like I said. And now I'm supposed to be grateful for another chance? To forget walking in on you in our bed? With another woman? To forget 20 years of being made to feel inadequate because I chose teaching over corporate advancement? People change, he argued, desperation edging his voice. I've changed. Finding out about your success, your new position, it's made me see you differently. And there it was, the fundamental problem laid bare in his own words. In Richard's world, my worth was determined by external validations, financial success, prestigious positions, social status. The woman who had loved poetry and students and quiet achievements had never been enough. That's the problem, I said softly. You're seeing me differently because of what I've achieved by your metrics. But I'm the same person I've always been, the one you found disappointing for most of our marriage. That's not true, he protested, but the conviction in his voice wavered. It is, I countered. And that's why this conversation is pointless. You don't want me, Richard. You want my money? My sudden prestige? The reflected glow of being associated with the new Vivian Monroe? But that Vivian doesn't want you. He left without further argument, the flowers remaining on my entry table like artifacts from another life. I donated them to a nearby nursing home the next morning. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon, a brief court appearance formalizing the end of 20 years in less than 20 minutes. I emerged into spring sunshine feeling lighter than I had in decades, the gold band I'd worn for so long already absent from my finger. 3 days later, I closed on a brownstone in the historic district, a property I'd admired for years when it was part of my daily walking route. With high ceilings, bay windows perfect for reading nooks, and a small garden in back, it represented everything I'd ever wanted in a home but had compromised on for Richard's preference for modern showplaces in prestigious neighborhoods. As I unlocked the front door for the first time as owner, I felt a surge of joy so pure it brought tears to my eyes. Not because of the property's value or what it represented financially, but because every square inch reflected choices I had made for myself, unfiltered through someone else's expectations. Jenny helped me furnish it, her keen eye for design, complementing my more literary aesthetic. Less corporate boardroom, more sophisticated librarian, she declared as we selected comfortable chairs, warm lighting, and shelves upon shelves for my books. The third bedroom became my writing studio. Walls painted the exact shade of blue I'd always wanted, windows overlooking the garden where I planted roses and herbs. My first day at the Morgan Foundation coincided with a feature in the education section of the city newspaper. Teacher turned philanthropic leader, Vivian Monroe brings classroom experience to literacy initiative. The article included quotes from former students, colleagues, and Melissa Morgan herself, who described me as a visionary educator whose practical experience will transform how we approach literacy in underserved communities. I kept a copy, not out of vanity, but as a reminder that recognition could come in unexpected forms at unexpected times. The article made no mention of my divorce or financial status, focusing entirely on my educational philosophy and plans for the Foundation's programs. The only person from my former life who reached out after the article was Margaret Whitmore, the Lakeside Academy board chair whose job offer I had declined. "I knew you were special from the moment we met," she said over lunch at her club. "Though I'll admit, I didn't realize just how special until recently." Her shrewd eyes assessed me with new respect. Richard never returned from administrative leave, resigned to pursue other opportunities, according to the official statement. I nodded, unsurprised. Richard's carefully constructed professional persona had always depended on the appearance of personal integrity. The divorce, combined with the widespread knowledge of his affair with a staff member, had made his position at Lakeside untenable. He's taken a consulting position with an educational technology firm, Margaret continued. Less prestigious than superintendent, but they're paying him well enough. She stirred her tea thoughtfully. Last I heard, Serena went back to Los Angeles. Apparently, yoga instruction is more lucrative there. I appreciated Margaret's intelligence gathering, but found myself remarkably uninterested in Richard's new life or Serena's whereabouts. They had become characters in a story I had finished reading, their subsequent chapters no longer relevant to my own narrative. "I wish them both well," I said sincerely. "But my focus is elsewhere now." Margaret smiled, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "As it should be. Though I must say, Vivian, you've given the ladies of Lakeside something we haven't had in years. A genuinely juicy scandal with a thoroughly satisfying conclusion. The wronged wife emerges triumphant, the philandering husband humbled, and all of us reminded that appearances can be deceiving in the most delightful ways." I laughed, recognizing the grain of truth in her assessment. In the rarefied social world of Lakeside Academy, my story had indeed become something of a modern fable, a cautionary tale for dismissive husbands and a beacon of hope for underestimated wives. 6 months after the divorce, on my 53rd birthday, I hosted a small gathering at my brownstone. Jenny and her partner, colleagues from the Morgan Foundation, friends from my teaching days, and neighbors I'd grown close to. As we shared wine and conversation in the garden I had planted, I found myself surrounded by a community I had built independently, relationships based on mutual respect rather than social obligation. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed, I sat alone in my reading nook, a leather-bound journal open on my lap. I had been keeping it since the night I discovered Richard's betrayal, documenting not just the divorce and its aftermath, but my own internal journey. Now, on the milestone of my first birthday in my new life, I wrote, 20 years ago, I believed love meant compromise, that marriage required the diminishment of self for the greater good of the partnership. For 2 decades, I made myself smaller to accommodate Richard's need to feel larger. I mistook his criticism for guidance, his dismissal for perspective. In losing what I thought was my whole world, I have discovered a universe within myself. My financial success is not the victory here. It is merely the tangible evidence of an internal compass I had silently followed, even while outwardly deferring to Richard's direction. The true triumph is in reclaiming my voice, my choices, my identity separate from any relationship. The woman I am becoming at 53 holds close the lessons of the woman I was at 30, at 40, at 50. She regrets nothing, not even the pain, for it was the catalyst for this metamorphosis. She looks forward not with fear of loneliness, but with anticipation of continued growth, continued discovery. Richard once asked if I had ever loved him. I answered honestly then, but incompletely. The full truth is this. I loved him as completely as I was capable of loving anyone while not yet loving myself. The woman who could have loved him better, loved him truly, is the woman I am becoming. Now, strong, independent, whole, and that woman is ready for whatever comes next. 18 months after the divorce, I found myself in San Francisco for a national education conference. The Morgan Foundation's literacy initiative had expanded to 12 states, with preliminary data showing promising results in the most underserved districts. I was scheduled to deliver a keynote address, sharing our methodology and outcomes, my first major speech to an audience of education leaders and policymakers from across the country. The evening before my presentation, I decided to explore the city. San Francisco had been on Richard's and my someday list, one of many destinations we'd planned to visit when the time was right, which somehow never arrived during our marriage. Now, walking alone along the Embarcadero as the setting sun painted the Bay Bridge in golden light, I felt a strange sense of reclamation, taking for myself what had once been filed away as a shared dream deferred. I found a small seafood restaurant, overlooking the water, requested a table for one, and was savoring a glass of local Chardonnay when I heard a voice from the past. Vivian? Vivian Monroe? I looked up to see Martin Abernathy, Richard's former mentor from his early days at Westlake High School. Martin had retired as principal 15 years earlier, moving to the West Coast to be near his daughter's family. In the staff hierarchy of our teaching days, he had been the wise elder, the respected leader who had recognized Richard's administrative potential before anyone else. Martin? I smiled, genuinely pleased to see him. What a wonderful surprise. May I join you? Unless you're expecting someone? He gestured to the empty chair across from me, his silver hair catching the restaurant's ambient lighting. Please do. I'm here alone, I replied, noting how his features, once sharp with authority, had softened into the gentle countenance of a man in his 70s. After ordering his own glass of wine, Martin studied me with kind, perceptive eyes. You look well, Vivian. Happy. It suits you. Thank you. I am happy, actually. No qualification, no hedging. The simple truth. I heard about the divorce, he said directly. Richard and I have fallen out of touch, but news travels in educational circles. I was sorry to hear it. I appreciated his straightforwardness. It was for the best, though I couldn't see it at the time. And now you're with the Morgan Foundation? I saw your name on the conference program. Quite impressive. The waiter delivered Martin's wine and took our dinner orders, providing a natural pause in the conversation. When he departed, Martin leaned forward slightly. I've wanted to say something to you for years, Vivian. Something I should have said long ago. His expression turned serious. I owe you an apology. An apology? I echoed, genuinely puzzled. Whatever for? Martin swirled his wine thoughtfully. For my role in Richard's career advancement. For not seeing, or perhaps seeing but not acknowledging, how his ambition was affecting your marriage. The unexpected direction of the conversation caught me off guard. That was hardly your responsibility, Martin. Maybe not directly, he conceded. But I recognized something in Richard from the beginning, a hunger for recognition, for advancement, that went beyond healthy ambition. I saw it, and instead of counseling balance, I encouraged it. He sighed. I was impressed by his drive, his charisma. I thought I was mentoring a future educational leader. Instead, I fear I helped create a man who sacrificed the personal for the professional until he could no longer distinguish between them. I absorbed his words, touched by the reflection they represented. We all make our own choices, Martin. Richard chose his path. So did I. Yes, but mentors have influence, particularly with young men seeking direction. He took a sip of wine, his gaze drifting toward the bay beyond the windows. My daughter once told me I had a blind spot when it came to ambitious young men, that I saw myself in them and overlooked warning signs I would have caught immediately in others. The observation struck a chord, reminding me of my own blind spots where Richard was concerned. We're all susceptible to seeing what we want to see in those we invest in, I offered. Martin's focus returned to me, his expression warming. This is why you were always the better teacher between you and Richard, you know. This emotional intelligence, this empathy. He could explain complex mathematical concepts brilliantly, but you understood the human calculus. The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly by someone who had known us both professionally, validated something I had long suspected but rarely acknowledged. Thank you for that, I said quietly. Our dinner arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Martin's grandchildren, my upcoming keynote, changes in educational philosophy over the decades. As we shared a dessert, he asked the question I had been anticipating. What happened, Vivian? With you and Richard, if you don't mind my asking. I considered how much to share with this man who had played such a significant role in Richard's early career. The full story seemed excessive, but a sanitized version felt dishonest. The simple version is that Richard had an affair with a colleague, I said finally. The complex version is that we grew in different directions until we no longer recognized what we'd seen in each other to begin with. Martin nodded, no judgment in his expression. And now? I gather from the conference materials that you've found your calling with the Morgan Foundation. I have, I smiled. Though found suggests it was lost. Perhaps acknowledged is more accurate. I've always known what mattered to me. Making education accessible, empowering through literacy. I've just shifted from doing it in one classroom to implementing it across multiple states. And Richard? Do you know what became of him after Lakeside? I described what little I knew of Richard's consulting position, keeping my tone neutral. Martin listened thoughtfully, then shared what he had heard through his own networks. That Richard's educational technology firm was struggling, that his expertise had proven less valuable in the corporate world than anticipated. He reached out to me, Martin revealed. About 4 months ago, wanted a reference for a position back in public education, a superintendency in a small district upstate. The information surprised me. Richard had been adamant throughout our marriage that he would never return to public education, viewing it as beneath his talents and ambition. "Did you provide the reference?" I asked. "I did," Martin said. "Not without reservations, but I did. Everyone deserves a second chance at getting it right." He paused, watching me carefully. "Though not everyone deserves a second chance with the people they've hurt." The distinction was important, and I appreciated his making it. "I wish him, well, truly, just from a considerable distance." Martin laughed, a warm sound that complemented the candlelit atmosphere. "A wise approach. And what about you, Vivian? Beyond the professional success, is there someone new in your life?" The question was posed with genuine interest rather than prying, allowing me to answer honestly. "Not in the romantic sense, no. I'm open to possibility, but I'm not searching for it. After 20 years of defining myself through my marriage, I'm enjoying discovering who I am on my own terms." He raised his glass in a small toast. "To self-discovery at any age." We parted with a warm embrace, exchanging contact information with genuine intentions to stay in touch. Walking back to my hotel through the San Francisco evening, I reflected on the unexpected gift of Martin's perspective. A glimpse of Richard through another lens. Neither the adoring eyes of our early years nor the disillusioned view of our ending. My keynote the following morning went exceptionally well, the auditorium filled with educators and administrators eager to learn from the Morgan Foundation's success. As I fielded questions afterward, a woman approached the microphone, identifying herself as the superintendent of a small district in Northern California. "Dr. Monroe, your approach to community integration in literacy programming is revolutionary," she began. "We've been struggling to connect with parents in our most vulnerable populations. Would you consider consulting directly with our district? We have a modest budget, but the impact could be significant." The request was flattering, but not unusual. Similar invitations had come following other presentations. What made this one different was the sincere urgency in her voice, the clear commitment to her students that resonated with my own educational values. "I'd be happy to explore possibilities," I replied. "Please speak with my colleague at the foundation table outside. We might be able to include your district in our pilot expansion." As the Q&A session concluded and attendees filed out, I remained at the podium gathering my notes when I noticed a familiar figure lingering at the back of the auditorium. Richard stood uncertainly in the exit row, dressed not in his usual power suit but in a more subdued outfit, appropriate for a conference attendee. Our eyes met across the emptying room, a moment of recognition that neither of us seemed prepared for. With the natural poise that comes from genuine confidence rather than performative assurance, I finished collecting my materials and made my way toward the exit where he waited. 2 years earlier, an unexpected encounter with Richard would have thrown me into emotional turmoil. Now, I felt only a calm curiosity. "Richard," I acknowledged as I reached him. "I didn't know you were attending the conference." "I wasn't planning to," he admitted, "but I saw your name on the program and—" He trailed off, seeming uncharacteristically unsure of himself. "Your presentation was excellent. The work you're doing with the foundation is impressive." "Thank you." I accepted the compliment without elaboration, neither cold nor encouraging. He shifted, glancing around the nearly empty auditorium. "I'm in the running for the Milton Valley Superintendency, smaller district than Lakeside, more diverse student population, more challenges, fewer resources." The admission was delivered without his usual spin, a simple statement of fact, rather, than an achievement to be admired. I noted the change with interest. "Martin mentioned you were exploring options in public education again." Richard nodded. "You've spoken with Martin?" "Last night, by coincidence. He's well." An awkward pause stretched between us, 23 years of history compressed into a moment of silence in a conference hall doorway. "I saw your article in the Education Leadership Journal last month," Richard said finally, "about literacy as social justice. It was It made me think differently about some things. The acknowledgement, small but significant, reflected a shift I wouldn't have believed possible during our marriage or its bitter ending. Not an apology, not a reconciliation attempt, but perhaps the beginning of something equally valuable, mutual, recognition of each other's legitimate contributions to the field we both cared about. "I'm glad to hear that," I replied, meaning it. A conference coordinator approached, informing me that the next session would be starting soon. The interruption provided a natural conclusion to our unexpected reunion. "I should go," I said. "Good. Luck with Milton Valley, Richard." Their students would be fortunate to have an administrator who's learned from both success and failure. The subtle reference to his professional and personal missteps wasn't lost on him. But rather than bristling with defensiveness as the old Richard would have, he accepted it with a slight nod. "Thank you, Vivian. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. For all of it." The words were simple, unadorned with justifications or qualifications. They couldn't erase 20 years of diminishment or the betrayal that ended our marriage, but they acknowledged the reality of what had passed between us. And in that acknowledgement, I found something unexpected. Not forgiveness exactly, but release. The final untangling of my sense of self from the marriage that had both shaped and constrained it. "I know," I replied softly. "Goodbye, Richard." As I navigated through the crowded convention center toward my next commitment, I felt a profound sense of completion. The woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal 2 years earlier could never have imagined standing confidently before hundreds of colleagues, leading national initiatives, or encountering her ex-husband with composed dignity rather than lingering hurt. That evening, I called Jenny from my hotel room, sharing the unexpected encounter and my surprisingly peaceful reaction to it. "You've officially graduated," she declared. From Richard's wife to Vivian Monroe, educational visionary who, oh yeah, used to be married to that guy. I laughed, appreciating her perspective as always. It felt like closing a book I'd already finished reading but had left open on the nightstand, finally putting it back on the shelf where it belongs. Acknowledged, but no longer central. "Poetic as always, Mrs. Monroe," Jenny teased. "So what's next on your reading list?" The question was metaphorical, but resonated beyond its intended meaning. What was next? Not just professionally, where the Foundation's expansion offered continuing challenges and opportunities, but personally? The woman who had defined herself first as Richard's wife, and then as Richard's ex-wife, was now fully, simply Vivian, educator, investor, mentor, friend. The future stretched before me not as a void to be filled with another relationship, but as an open landscape of possibility. "I'm thinking of writing that novel," I said suddenly. "The one Richard always dismissed as a retirement fantasy. I've started outlining it during my travels." "About time," Jenny approved. "The world needs more stories about women who discover their power later in life. Just promise me the protagonist doesn't settle for some mediocre man in the third act." "No chance of that," I promised, watching the San Francisco skyline glitter against the night through my hotel window. "She's far too interesting on her own." 2. Years after the San Francisco conference, my novel Late Bloomer hit the shelves. What had begun as a personal project, writing in early mornings before foundation work, during flights between program sites, and late evenings in my brownstone, had transformed into something I never anticipated, a critically acclaimed debut that resonated with women across generations. The story followed a 50-something professor who discovers her talent for investing after her husband's death leaves her financially vulnerable. While not autobiographical in plot, the emotional landscape came from my own experience, the awakening, that occurs when a woman stops defining herself through others' expectations and embraces her own capabilities. "You've struck a nerve," my editor Caroline told me over lunch after the book had spent 6 weeks on the bestseller list. Women who've spent decades supporting others' dreams are starving for stories that validate their own delayed ambitions. The far, Book tour took me to 12 cities in 3 weeks, a whirlwind of readings, signings, and interviews that both exhausted and exhilarated me. In Chicago, the event venue had to add chairs 3 times as the line of attendees stretched around the block. In Denver, 3 generations of women from one family presented me with handmade bookmarks, each inscribed with their own late-blooming aspirations. In Atlanta, a retirement community chartered a bus to bring 30 residents to my signing. "We're your demographic," an 80-year-old former school teacher told me with a wink as I signed her copy, "though some of us are blooming later than others." The tour's final stop brought me back to my hometown, the city where my marriage had begun and ended, where Richard and I had built and dismantled a life together, where I had rediscovered myself in the aftermath. The local bookstore, an independent shop I'd frequented throughout my teaching years, had arranged an event in conjunction with the Women's Leadership Program at the university. The familiar faces in the crowd, former students, teaching colleagues, neighbors, created an unexpectedly emotional atmosphere. These were people who had known me as Richard's wife, long before I had reclaimed my identity as simply Vivian. Their presence represented a bridge between my past and present selves, witnesses to a transformation they might not fully comprehend, but could certainly observe. After reading a passage about the protagonist's first independent financial decision, investing in a small tech company against her late husband's posthumous influence, I opened the floor for questions. Among the predictable inquiries about writing process and publication journey came one that caught me off guard. "Your protagonist finds her confidence after her husband's death," a young woman in the back row began. "But for many women, the obstacle isn't a deceased spouse but a very present one, a partner who actively undermines rather than just failing to support. What would you say to someone in that situation, who can't simply wait for widowhood to claim her independence?" The room grew quiet, the question's pointed relevance hanging in the air. I considered my response carefully, aware of the personal experience that colored my perspective. I'd say that waiting for external circumstances to change is a gamble. No one should take with their one precious life, I replied. The protagonist in my novel needed her husband's death to catalyze her awakening, but that's the limitation of fiction. We need dramatic triggers for narrative momentum. In reality, the most powerful catalyst is simply permission, giving ourselves permission to want more, to be more, regardless of others' expectations. I paused, remembering my own watershed moment, not discovering Richard's affair, which had merely been the final push, but the earlier, quieter revelation when I'd first invested my inheritance against his wishes and judgment. The smallest independent choice can be revolutionary, I continued, not because of its scale, but because it establishes a precedent. This is mine. This decision is mine. This life is mine. Everything follows from that first reclamation. After the event concluded and the last book was signed, I found myself alone in the bookstore with Jenny, who had attended quietly in support. Now, co-founder of her own venture capital firm focused on women-led startups, she had become not just a friend, but a business partner, managing a portion of my investment portfolio specifically targeted at female entrepreneurs. That question about undermining spouses, she mused as we walked toward the exit. Did you see who asked it? I shook my head, the faces in the audience having blurred after 2 hours of intense interaction. Serena Davis, Jenny said softly. Your ex-husband's former yoga instructor. I stopped, genuinely surprised. Are you certain? Absolutely. She looks different. Darker hair, glasses. But it was her. I checked her social media to confirm. The revelation was jarring, not because of lingering resentment, but because of the strange symmetry it suggested. The woman whose affair with Richard had catalyzed my independence was now seeking wisdom from the woman who had emerged stronger from that betrayal. Should I have recognized her? I wondered aloud, though the question wasn't really directed at Jenny. Would it have changed your answer if you had? She countered. I considered this, then shook my head. No. Truth is truth, regardless of who's asking the question. The following morning, as I packed for my flight home, an email notification appeared on my phone, a message sent through my author website's contact form. The sender's name confirmed Jenny's identification, Serena Davis. Ms. Monroe, you wouldn't remember me, but we share a complicated connection. I was the woman your ex-husband was involved with at the end of your marriage. I attended your reading last night and asked about undermining partners. What you couldn't have known is that Richard and I married shortly after your divorce, and that I left him 8 months later when his controlling behavior and financial manipulation became unbearable. Your answer about not waiting for external circumstances to change resonated deeply. I'm writing not to dredge up painful history, but to thank you. Your book gave me courage during a dark time. The protagonist's journey from dependence to self-trust paralleled what I needed to learn much earlier than you did. I'm now completing my master's degree in counseling, focusing on helping women recognize and leave toxic relationships. There's an irony here that isn't lost on me, that the woman whose marriage I helped destroy would later help save me from my own disastrous choice. Perhaps that's the unexpected legacy of painful experiences. They create wisdom that serves others in ways we could never anticipate. With respect and gratitude, Serena, I read the message twice, absorbing its implications. There was a time when any communication from Serena would have triggered anger, resentment, perhaps even satisfaction at her suffering with Richard. Now I felt only a complex compassion for the younger woman who had made choices without understanding their consequences, for Richard himself, trapped in patterns he seemed unable to break, and for the person I had been, who had stayed too long in a diminishing relationship. My reply was brief but sincere. Serena, thank you for your message. The paths that connect us are indeed unexpected. I'm glad the book provided support during your difficult transition, and I admire your decision to transform your experience into help for others. Our shared history with Richard isn't something I would have chosen, but I believe we've both extracted valuable lessons from it. I wish you success in your counseling career and personal journey. Vivian, as I drove to the airport, I reflected on the strange circularity of life. How situations that once seemed like endings often contain the seeds of new beginnings. How people who enter our lives as adversaries might later become unexpected allies in the broader human experience of growth and self-discovery. The woman boarding the plane was neither the accommodating wife who had hidden her financial acumen, nor the wounded divorcee determined to prove her worth. She was simply Vivian, author, philanthropist, investor, mentor, and perpetual student of her own evolving potential. In my carry-on bag, nestled beside my laptop, was a small notebook containing preliminary ideas for my second novel. This one would explore not the awakening that follows betrayal, but the freedom that comes from finally understanding that our value has never been determined by those who failed to see it, that we have always been the authors of our own worth, waiting for the courage to write it large enough for the world to read. 5 years after my debut novel, on a crisp autumn morning, an unexpected envelope arrived among my usual correspondence. The cream-colored stationery bore the embossed letterhead of Milton Valley School District, where Richard had secured the superintendent position after our encounter at the San Francisco conference. Inside was a formal invitation to deliver the commencement address at Milton Valley's graduating class ceremony, along with a handwritten note. Vivian, our seniors selected you as their commencement speaker after studying Late Bloomer in their contemporary literature course. Your journey from teacher to foundation director to acclaimed author resonated deeply with them. As educators, we've incorporated your literacy methodologies with remarkable results, particularly among our first-generation college-bound students. I understand if this request creates discomfort given our history. The invitation comes from our students and faculty committee, who are unaware of our personal connection. Should you decline, I'll respect your decision completely and ensure a suitable alternative is found without revealing the reason. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to express my professional admiration for the impact your work has had on education nationally, including in my small corner of it. Respectfully, Richard Monroe, Ed D. Superintendent. The note displayed none of Richard's former condescension or manipulation, just a straightforward professional courtesy with clear boundaries and genuine respect. Reading it, I felt neither the flutter of old wounds nor the satisfaction of vindication, but something quieter, simple acknowledgement of how thoroughly we had both moved beyond the people we once were. My decision surprised even me. After consulting with my assistant to ensure the date didn't conflict with foundation commitments or my writing schedule, I penned a response accepting the invitation. My only stipulation was that the introduction make no mention of my former connection to Richard, focusing solely on my professional achievements. Milton Valley High School was nothing like the prestigious Lakeside Academy, where Richard had once presided in tailored suits and practiced authority. The campus buildings were utilitarian rather than imposing, the grounds modest but well-maintained. As I parked in the visitors' space 3 months later, I noted the garden beds bursting with student-grown vegetables, the mural depicting local, historical figures including several women of color, the solar panels glinting on the gymnasium roof. Dr. Monroe, the young English teacher who greeted me fairly, vibrated with enthusiasm. I'm Emma Castillo. We've been using your literacy framework with our ESL students with incredible results. And the seniors absolutely devoured your novel. Even the boys. Which, let me tell you, is saying something for a book with a female protagonist over 50. Her genuine excitement was infectious, reminding me of my own early teaching days before Richard's ambition had cast its long shadow over my career. As she led me through hallways decorated with student artwork and multilingual welcome signs, I glimpsed a different side of Richard's professional evolution, a school culture that valued creativity and inclusivity over rigid achievement metrics. In the principal's office, a small reception awaited. Department heads, student government representatives, and Richard himself, standing slightly apart as if conscious of maintaining appropriate distance. Our greeting was cordial, professional, with no hint of our complex history visible to the observers. "Thank you for accepting our invitation," he said simply. "The students are thrilled." The commencement ceremony took place on the football field, families crowding the bleachers with bouquets and balloons, graduates fidgeting in their caps and gowns beneath the afternoon sun. As valedictorian speeches concluded and my introduction began, I found myself unexpectedly moved by the significance of this full-circle moment, from high school English teacher to nationally recognized educator addressing graduates in a district, led by my former husband. My speech avoided the expected platitudes about bright futures and limitless possibilities. Instead, I spoke directly to the reality these students faced, a world of economic uncertainty, climate change, and social division. The most valuable skill you can cultivate isn't confidence in what you know, I told them, but comfort with what you don't. The greatest minds are those that remain perpetually open to revision, of facts, of opinions, and most importantly, of your understanding of yourself. As applause concluded and graduates received their diplomas, I observed Richard from my seat, on the stage. His interactions with students showed genuine connection, remembering names, referencing personal achievements, offering words clearly meant for individual ears rather than general congratulations. It was evident that whatever his past shortcomings as a husband, he had evolved into an administrator who saw students as whole people rather than statistics for his resume. At the reception afterward, we found ourselves momentarily alone beside the refreshment table, an inevitable convergence we had both likely anticipated. "Your speech was excellent," he said, maintaining a professional distance. "Especially the part about being willing to revise your understanding of yourself." "Thank you. I meant every word of it." I gestured toward the celebrating students and families. "You've built something meaningful here, Richard. It's a different direction than Lakeside. but perhaps a more impactful one. A flicker of surprise crossed his features, as if genuine approval from me carried unexpected weight. "I've had to unlearn a lot of what I thought made a good educational leader," he admitted. "Working with this community, where many families are struggling economically but rich in determination, has changed my priorities completely." The conversation might have ended there, a brief professional exchange between former spouses, but Richard hesitated, then added, "I read your book. Twice, actually." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious. And I recognized myself in all the worst ways," he said quietly. "The husband who couldn't see his wife's brilliance because it didn't fit his narrative of success. The man who measured worth in dollars and status rather than character and contribution." He met my gaze directly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Vivian. Just telling you that your words changed how I see the world, including my role in our shared past." In that moment, I understood that true wealth had never been about my investment portfolio or Richard's career achievements. True wealth was this: the capacity for growth, the courage to confront one's failings, the freedom to rewrite one's story, regardless of age or past mistakes. "We all deserve second chances," I replied, echoing Martin's words from years before. "Not with the same people, perhaps, but with ourselves." As I drove away from Milton Valley that evening, the graduation tassels swinging from rearview mirrors of departing cars catching the setting sun, I felt a sense of completion so profound it brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Not for loss or regret, but for the perfect symmetry of a journey that had begun in a high school classroom decades ago and now, in ways I could never have imagined, had returned me there. Not as the diminished woman I had once been, but as the fullest version of myself I had ever known. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.